I heard my son tell his wife, "Once Mom dies, we get everything." I was standing right there. He jumped. "Mom, you're supposed to be," I replied. "Dead? The funeral you planned for next week? Let me tell you who's actually in that coffin." Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Ellis, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life had to offer. I was wrong, dead wrong, as my son Michael apparently hoped I'd be by now. But let me start from the beginning, back when I still believed that sacrifice and love were always rewarded with loyalty. I became a widow at 32 when my husband James died in a construction accident. 3 kids, no life insurance, and a mortgage that felt like a mountain. Sarah was 10, Michael was 8, and little David was just 4. The day after James's funeral, I looked at my children's faces and made a promise that I would give them everything they needed to succeed in life. I just never imagined that one of them would try to take everything back, including my life. For 36 years, I worked as a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. Double shifts were my normal. Holiday shifts paid extra, so I worked every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every Easter. I told myself that missing those moments was worth it if it meant my kids could go to college without debt. When other nurses complained about 12-hour shifts, I signed up for 16. When my back ached so bad I could barely stand, I popped ibuprofen and kept working. My hands, once soft and delicate, became rough and worn from countless IV insertions and constant hand sanitizer. Michael was always the golden child, straight A's, basketball star, the one everyone said would make something of himself. I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing she'd left me, to pay for his SAT prep courses. When he got into Northwestern University, I cried tears of joy, even though it meant taking a second job doing private duty nursing on weekends. I remember eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day for 4 years while he was in college, telling myself that mothers do what they have to do. The house we lived in wasn't much to look at from the outside. A simple 2-story colonial in Oak Park with shutters that needed painting and a porch that creaked. But it was ours, or it would be once I made that final payment. Every extra dollar went to that mortgage. I patched my own clothes, cut my own hair, drove the same car for 20 years. The day I made that final payment, I sat on my porch and cried. This house would be my children's inheritance, proof that their father and I had left them something valuable. I never remarried. There were opportunities, good men who asked me to dinner, to dance, to share a life, but I always said no. My children needed stability, needed to know they were my priority. Besides, between work and raising them, when would I have had time for romance? Love was luxury I couldn't afford, and I told myself that my children's love was enough. Even after retirement last year, I kept giving. I babysat Michael's children for free whenever he needed. I cooked Sunday dinners for the whole family, spending my Social Security check on prime rib and organic vegetables, because Jennifer, Michael's wife, insisted on eating clean. When their car broke down, I gave them $5,000 from my savings without hesitation. When they mentioned struggling with credit card debt, I offered to help. That's who I was, a mother who gave everything and asked for nothing in return, a woman who measured her worth in her children's success, a fool who believed that sacrifice would be remembered and love would protect her from betrayal. My days had settled into a rhythm that felt like a warm embrace after decades of chaos. Every morning at 6:30, I'd wake without an alarm clock, my body still programmed from 40 years of hospital shifts. But instead of rushing to put on scrubs, I'd slip into my soft cotton robe and pad downstairs to make coffee in the same percolator James bought for our first anniversary. The kitchen would fill with that rich aroma while I stood at the window, watching the cardinals visit the bird feeder he'd built with his own hands. The rose garden was my sanctuary. James had planted those roses the year Michael was born, one bush for each child, the red ones for Sarah, white for Michael, and pink for David. Every morning after coffee, I'd spend an hour tending them, talking to them like old friends. The neighbors probably thought I was going senile. chatting away with my flowers. But those roses knew all my secrets. They'd grown strong and beautiful over the years, their thorns reminding me that even beautiful things need protection. Tuesdays were for the book club at the library. 8 women who'd become my dearest friends, reading everything from mystery novels to memoirs. We discussed plot twists over homemade cookies and tea, never imagining I'd soon be living through a thriller of my own. Gladys always saved the seat next to her for me, and we'd whisper jokes during Martha's lengthy literary analyses. These women had seen me through my darkest days after James died, and their friendship had become as essential as breathing. Wednesdays meant volunteering at the church food pantry. I'd arrive at 8 sharp to help sort donations and pack grocery bags for families in need. Father Thomas often said I had a gift for knowing exactly what each family needed beyond food. A kind word for the struggling single mother, an extra can of formula slipped in quietly, a coloring book for the little boy who waited patiently while his grandmother shopped. It felt good to give back after all those years when I'd been the one counting pennies. Thursday afternoons belonged to my grandchildren. I'd pick them up from school and we'd have our special time before Michael collected them. Emma, 12 and serious like her grandfather, would spread her homework across my kitchen table, while 8-year-old Tyler would raid my cookie jar. I taught Emma to knit, her fingers clumsy but determined, while Tyler would build elaborate Lego cities on my living room floor. Those hours were golden, filled with stories about school drama and soccer games, punctuated by hugs that still smelled like playground dirt and childhood innocence. Sunday dinners were sacred. By 2 o'clock, my kitchen would transform into a production line of familiar comfort. Pot roast with vegetables from my small garden, mashed potatoes whipped with real butter and cream, green beans seasoned the way James's mother taught me. The apple pie cooling on the counter was always Michael's favorite, made from scratch with apples from the farmer's market. I'd set the dining room table with my good china, the set James and I received as a wedding gift, each plate a reminder of promises made and love shared. The photo albums lived on my coffee table, their pages soft from years of turning. In the evenings, I'd flip through them, adding new pictures from my phone that Sarah taught me to print at the pharmacy. There was Michael's college graduation, Jennifer's perfectly styled hair gleaming in the sun, Sarah's wedding where she looked radiant in my altered wedding dress, David's medical school white coat ceremony, his smile bright with promise. Each photo was carefully labeled in my neat handwriting, dates and places, and funny memories that might otherwise fade. This was my life, simple, peaceful, purposeful. A life built on love and duty, where my greatest joy came from seeing my family gathered around my table, their laughter filling rooms that had once echoed with my tears of exhaustion. I thought this was my happily ever after. The changes started so gradually that I almost didn't notice them, like watching paint fade in the sun. It was a Thursday afternoon in early September when Michael showed up unexpectedly. I was in the garden, deadheading the roses, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. My heart lifted the way it always did when one of my children visited outside our usual schedule. But when he walked through the garden gate, his smile seemed rehearsed, like an actor who'd forgotten his motivation. "Mom, we need to talk about your future," he said, pulling up a lawn chair beside me. The way he said it made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't explain why. Michael had always been direct, but this felt different, calculated. He started asking about my health insurance coverage, specifically about long-term care benefits and what would happen if I became incapacitated. He wanted to know exact numbers, coverage limits, co-payments. When I mentioned I was perfectly healthy, he waved his hand dismissively. "Of course you are, but we need to plan ahead. At your age, things can change quickly. At my age." The phrase stung more than it should have. 68 wasn't ancient. I still walked 3 miles every morning, still carried my own groceries, still remembered every birthday and anniversary without writing them down. But Michael kept pressing, pulling out his phone to take notes about my Medicare supplements, my Social Security benefits, asking if I'd ever looked into additional life insurance policies. The following week, Jennifer started joining him on visits. This was unusual because Jennifer had always treated our Sunday dinners like an obligation, checking her phone constantly and leaving early for spin class or wine tastings with friends. Suddenly, she was interested in everything about the house. She walked through rooms like a real estate agent, asking when we'd last updated the kitchen, commenting on how original hardwood floors were so trendy right now. She even went up to the attic, claiming she wanted to help me declutter, but I caught her taking photos with her phone. This neighborhood has really transformed, Jennifer mentioned over coffee, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against my old ceramic mug. The Petersons sold their place for $2.8 million last month. Can you imagine? And their house is smaller than yours. She said it casually, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. When I mentioned I had no plans to sell, she exchanged a look with Michael that made my skin crawl. They started asking about my will with an urgency that felt wrong. Michael brought it up during dinner, between bites of pot roast. You haven't updated it since Dad died, right? That was so long ago. Laws have changed. Tax codes are different now. He offered to set me up with his lawyer, someone who could make sure everything is properly structured. When I said my old will was fine, that everything would be divided equally among my 3 children, he pressed harder. But what about specific items? The house? Your savings? We should have everything clearly documented to avoid confusion. Confusion for whom? I wanted to ask. My wishes had always been crystal clear. Then there were the phone calls I'd accidentally overhear. Michael would step into the garden to take them, but voices carry in quiet neighborhoods. No, not yet, I heard him say once. She's being stubborn, but we're working on it. Another time. The timeline is tight, I know. Just give me a few more weeks. The most unsettling change was how they looked at me. Not with love or concern, but assessment. Like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to overcome. Michael would watch me climb stairs, timing me perhaps. Jennifer started commenting on every small thing. If I repeated a story, if I misplaced my reading glasses, if I forgot to turn off a burner immediately. Something was happening in my own home, with my own son, and I couldn't name it yet. I became an expert at explaining away the obvious, like a child, covering their eyes and believing they're invisible. Every strange behavior had to have an innocent explanation, because the alternative was unthinkable. Michael was my son, the baby I'd nursed through pneumonia when he was 3, staying awake for 48 hours straight, praying over his fevered body. Evil couldn't grow from something I'd loved that purely. When Sarah called me that Sunday evening, her voice tight with concern, I was already armed with excuses. Mom, Michael called me asking weird questions about your health. He wanted to know if you'd shown any signs of confusion, if you'd had any falls I hadn't told him about. Why would he ask that? I could hear the worry in her voice, but I laughed it off, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Oh, honey, he's just being protective. You know how he worries. Remember when he insisted on installing those grab bars in my bathroom? He's always been the cautious one. But Sarah wouldn't let it go so easily. Mom, he asked me if I thought you were still competent to manage your finances. Those were his exact words. Competent. Like you're some kind of legal case. The word hung between us through the phone line, ugly and sharp. I felt my chest tighten, but I pushed the feeling down, burying it beneath years of maternal instinct to protect and defend my children, even from each other. Sarah, sweetheart, you're reading too much into it. Michael has a stressful job. Jennifer's been pushing him about their own finances. Maybe he's just projecting his anxieties. You know how men are. They show love by trying to control things. Even as I said it, I knew I was reaching, grasping for explanations like trying to hold water in cupped hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood in my bedroom looking at Michael's childhood photos on my dresser. His gap-toothed smile at age 7, wearing the Superman costume I'd sewn myself because we couldn't afford store-bought. His high school graduation picture, standing proud in the cap and gown I'd paid for by working extra shifts during flu season. These images were proof of his goodness, weren't they? Evil doesn't smile that sweetly, doesn't hug that tightly. I started baking more when he visited, as if cookies could solve whatever was wrong. His favorite chocolate chip cookies, the ones with extra vanilla and sea salt that he'd loved since childhood. I told myself that if I could just show him enough love, enough motherly devotion, whatever darkness was creeping into his heart would dissipate. Love conquers all, doesn't it? That's what I'd taught my children, what I'd believed my whole life. When David, my youngest, texted me about Michael asking him similar questions, I typed back quickly, "Your brother is just stressed about work. Let's not make a mountain out of a molehill." But my hands shook as I pressed send. David was in his medical residency, barely had time to sleep, let alone worry about family drama. If Michael was reaching out to him too, it meant something. But what? My mind refused to complete the thought. I even made excuses to myself when I found myself hiding my valuable documents, moving my jewelry box to the back of my closet, tucking my social security card and passport into an old cookbook. Just being organized. I whispered to no one, knowing I was lying. My body knew the truth, even as my heart denied it. The way my pulse quickened when Michael's car pulled up. The way I found myself counting my pills each morning, making sure none were missing. The way I started making copies of important papers and storing them in my filing cabinet. "He's a good boy," I repeated like a mantra while gardening, while cooking, while lying awake at night. "He loves me. Children don't hurt their mothers. Not my Michael. Not my golden boy." It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when denial crumbled into cold, hard proof. Michael had come over unexpectedly again, saying Jennifer was at her Pilates class and he thought he'd keep me company. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his phone, checking the time repeatedly. When it rang, he jumped up so quickly that his jacket, draped over the kitchen chair, knocked against my teacup. "I need to take this outside," he said, already heading for the door. "Work emergency." I reached for paper towels to soak up the spilled tea, noticing his jacket had fallen to the floor. As I picked it up, something fell from the inner pocket. A business card, elegant and cream-colored, expensive cardstock that felt thick between my fingers. "Eternal Rest Funeral Home, where dignity meets compassion." The director's name was printed in gold letters, Thomas Morrison, Funeral Director, but it was the handwriting on the back that made my blood turn to ice. Michael's distinctive scrawl, the same handwriting I'd seen on Mother's Day cards and grocery lists for 30 years, spelled out an appointment. Thursday, September 15th, 2 p.m. Package deal, cremation included. No open casket needed. Below that, in smaller letters, Jennifer's cousin can do death certificate, Dr. Morrison. My legs gave out, and I sank into the kitchen chair, the card trembling in my hand. September 15th was next week. I was holding an appointment card for my own funeral, planned by my son while I was still breathing, still making his favorite cookies, still very much alive. The room spun as I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was for someone else. Maybe Michael knew someone who was dying. But why would Jennifer's cousin be involved with a death certificate? Why was it hidden in his jacket? Why the secrecy? My nursing training kicked in, the same analytical mind that had diagnosed thousands of patients now diagnosing my own situation. The symptoms all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. I heard Michael's footsteps on the porch and quickly slipped the card into my apron pocket, hanging his jacket back on the chair. My hands were steady as I poured fresh tea. Years of emergency room experience teaching me to stay calm in crisis. He came back in, shaking rain from his hair, that practiced smile back on his face. "Sorry about that, Mom. You know how demanding clients can be." "Of course, sweetheart," I managed, my voice surprisingly normal. "Would you like some cookies, fresh from the oven?" I watched him eat them, the same cookies I'd made him for 30 years, wondering how long he'd been planning this. How many Sunday dinners had he sat at my table, calculating my worth in insurance policies and property values. How many times had he hugged me goodbye while scheduling my funeral? That evening, after he left, I sat at my computer and looked up Eternal Rest Funeral Home. It was real, located 40 miles away in a town where no one would know us. Far enough that neighbors wouldn't accidentally drive by and wonder why there was a funeral when I was still walking my dog. I found Thomas Morrison's bio on their website. He specialized in discreet services and expedited arrangements, the kind of place you'd choose if you didn't want questions asked. Then I searched for Dr. Morrison. There were 3 in the state, but only one was Jennifer's maiden name, Dr. Kyle Morrison, a general practitioner who'd had his license suspended twice for irregular death certificates, but somehow still practiced. Jennifer's cousin, the one she'd mentioned at Thanksgiving, who was going through a rough patch and needed money. The pieces were falling into place like a nightmare jigsaw puzzle. I pulled the card from my pocket again, staring at the date. September 15th. 8 days from now, my son expected me to be dead. The evidence was clear, undeniable, written in his own hand. The golden boy I'd sacrificed everything for was planning my murder. The next Sunday, I made a decision that would shatter the last fragments of my denial. Michael and Jennifer came for dinner as usual, and I announced I was feeling tired, that I'd take a short nap after eating. "All that cooking wore me out," I said with a weak smile, watching them exchange a quick glance. Jennifer actually looked pleased. "You should rest more, Mom," Michael said, his concern so perfectly performed. "At your age, you need to be careful not to overexert yourself." I climbed the stairs slowly, making sure they heard every creak, then slipped into the guest bedroom instead of mine. From there, through the heating vent, I could hear everything in the living room below. I pressed my ear to the floor, my heart hammering so hard I was afraid they'd hear it through the ceiling. 20 minutes passed before they started talking, confident I was asleep. "We need to move faster." Jennifer's voice was sharp, impatient. "The property developers won't hold their offer forever. They want to break ground on the new condos by spring." I know," Michael responded. "But we can't be sloppy. Everything has to look natural. Mom's been healthy her whole life. If she suddenly drops dead, people will ask questions." "That's why we've been increasing her medication in her tea," Jennifer said, and I had to cover my mouth to stifle a gasp. "The digitalis from her heart medication won't show up as suspicious in an autopsy because she has a prescription. We just need enough to cause confusion, maybe a fall. Then Dr. Morrison can say her heart gave out from the trauma." My own son had been poisoning me. Every Sunday dinner, every cup of tea he'd lovingly prepared had been laced with my own medicine. The fatigue I'd been feeling, the occasional dizziness I'd attributed to age, it was all orchestrated. "The funeral home is all set," Michael continued, and I could hear papers rustling. "Tom Morrison says he can handle everything. Closed casket because of the trauma from the fall, immediate cremation, no autopsy needed with Kyle signing the death certificate. By the time Sarah or David could even get here from out of state, it'll all be over." "And the insurance?" Jennifer asked. $2 million from the life insurance policy Dad took out years ago. Mom never knew he'd made me the sole beneficiary before he died. Forged her signature on the change form, plus another $500,000 from her own policy. And this house is worth at least $3 million in this market, maybe $3.5 million if we sell to developers. $5.5 million, Jennifer practically purred. We can finally live the life we deserve. That house in Aspen, the boat, Emma's private school tuition. We'll need someone to pose as Mom for the property transfer, Michael said. Your friend from the theater group? Already arranged. She's the right age, similar height. With a wig and Mom's clothes, the notary won't know the difference. We'll say Mom wanted a quick sale before moving to assisted living. I heard liquid pouring. A toast, Michael said, to our future. By next Sunday, we'll be planning our new life instead of these tedious family dinners. Thank God, Jennifer laughed. I'm so tired of pretending to enjoy her dry pot roast and listening to the same stories about your father. Though I'll miss the free babysitting. We'll hire a nanny, a young, pretty one, Michael joked, and they both laughed. They continued discussing details, how they'd act at the funeral, what to tell the children, how to handle my friends' questions. Every word was another knife in my heart. They'd thought of everything, planned every detail of my death like it was a business transaction. My son, my golden boy, discussing my murder between sips of wine in the living room where I'd taught him to walk. I spent the next 3 days investigating like a detective on my own case, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. The conspiracy was a web so intricate that my son could have written a crime novel. I started by checking my medications, counting pills I'd never thought to count before. My digitalis prescription, meant for occasional heart palpitations, was nearly empty despite being filled just 2 weeks ago. 40 pills missing. Each Sunday tea he'd made me with such apparent care had been a small dose of attempted murder. In my desk drawer, I found documents I didn't remember signing. Power of attorney papers with my signature, except it wasn't quite right. The M in Margaret was too sharp, the E in Ellis too curved. I'd taught Michael to write by having him trace my letters when he was 5. He'd apparently kept practicing. There were documents for property transfers in case of incapacitation, bank account modifications adding him as full co-owner instead of just emergency contact, all dated within the last 2 months, all with that slightly off signature. I drove to the bank claiming I needed to review my accounts for tax purposes. The manager, sweet young Ashley, who always complimented my brooch, pulled up my records. "Oh, Mr. Ellis was just here last week," she said brightly. "He mentioned you've been having some memory issues, so he wanted to make sure all the bills were set to auto-pay from your account." Memory issues. I'd never forgotten a bill in my life. But Michael had been laying groundwork, painting me as a confused old woman to anyone who'd listen. The most chilling discovery came when I checked my phone records online. Sarah had taught me how to do this last Christmas, never knowing she was giving me tools to uncover a murder plot. There were calls to my number that I'd never received, conversations with me that never happened, calls to my doctor's office canceling appointments, calls to my lawyer saying I was happy with my current will. Michael had been using some kind of technology to spoof my number, creating a digital trail of a woman losing her faculties. I found out he'd been telling neighbors I'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Mrs. Patterson from across the street had looked at me with such pity last week, and now I knew why. He told my book club I was getting confused with plots, suggested to Father Thomas that I might need to step back from volunteering. For 2 months, he'd been slowly, methodically, destroying my reputation for mental clarity. Jennifer had done her part too. She'd contacted 3 different real estate development firms, all offering cash deals for immediate transfer upon my death. She'd even staged photos of my house, which I found on her Instagram tagged as inspiration for our future renovation project. My home, where her children played, where I'd welcomed her as a daughter, was already just property in her mind. She'd researched how long probate would take, how to expedite property transfer, even looked into companies that specialized in estate liquidation services. But the depth of the planning went further. They'd opened a storage unit where they were already moving some of my valuable items. Small things I hadn't noticed missing. James's watch from the bedroom drawer, my mother's silver tea set from the china cabinet, first edition books from the study. Items that could be sold without documentation, no questions asked. They were robbing me before they'd even killed me. Dr. Kyle Morrison, Jennifer's cousin, had a gambling debt of $80,000. Michael had proof of his falsified medical documents from other cases, blackmail material ensuring cooperation. The funeral director, Thomas Morrison, Kyle's brother, I discovered, owed back taxes that would cost him his business. Michael had offered to pay them in exchange for discreet services. Even the woman who'd pose as me for the property transfer was being blackmailed, threatened with exposure of an affair if she didn't cooperate. My son hadn't just planned a murder. He'd built an entire machinery of death with backup plans and fail-safes, all centered around ending my life for money. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom and fell apart completely. The tears came in waves so violent that I couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't do anything but curl into a ball on the bed I'd shared with James and sob until my ribs ached. I pressed my face into the pillow to muffle the screams that tore from my throat, primal sounds of a mother whose heart had been ripped from her chest by the child she'd carried for 9 months. I crawled to my closet and pulled out the box of baby memories I'd saved. Michael's hospital bracelet from the day he was born, so tiny it could barely fit around my thumb now. The lock of golden hair from his first haircut. The Mother's Day card he'd made in kindergarten with crayon and glitter. I love you more than ice cream and cartoons combined. My tears fell onto the construction paper, 30-year-old glitter sticking to my wet cheeks like the remnants of a life that had meant everything. How many nights had I sat by his bed when he was sick? I remembered the chicken pox when he was 6, how I dabbed calamine lotion on each spot while singing softly to distract him from the itching. The night he'd broken his arm falling from his bike, how I'd held him while they set the bone, whispering that Mommy was there, that everything would be okay. I'd given him my strength, my youth, my dreams. I'd built my entire identity around being Michael's mother, and now that same child was planning my funeral. I found his high school graduation photo and traced his face with trembling fingers. He was wearing the suit I'd bought with money saved by skipping lunch for 3 months. His smile was radiant, full of promise and hope. When had that beautiful boy become a monster? Was it gradual, like erosion, or was the evil always there, hidden beneath the surface of his charm? Had I been so blinded by love that I'd missed the signs? Or worse, had my sacrifices somehow created this entitlement, this belief that he deserved everything, including my life? The cruelest thoughts came at 3 a.m. Maybe this was my fault. Maybe if James had lived, Michael would have had a father's discipline. Maybe if I hadn't worked so much, hadn't been so tired, I could have taught him better values. Maybe if I'd remarried, shown him that I had value beyond being his servant, he would have seen me as a person rather than a resource to be exploited. The maybes tortured me more than the betrayal itself. I pulled out photo albums from every year of his life, searching for the moment it went wrong. Here he was at 8, helping me bake cookies for the church bake sale. At 12, mowing Mrs. Henderson's lawn because she'd broken her hip. At 16, hugging me after I'd surprised him with concert tickets I couldn't afford. Every image showed a loving son, every memory painted him as kind. Had it all been performance? Had he ever loved me at all? Or was I just a long-term investment? A retirement fund he'd been waiting to cash in? The physical pain was real, a crushing weight in my chest that made me understand how people could die from heartbreak. My body shook with the force of my grief, mourning not just the son I'd lost, but the illusion of who I'd thought he was. Every sacrifice felt like mockery now. Every hour of overtime, every missed opportunity, every dream deferred for his future. It had all been building toward my murder. "My baby," I whispered to his photo, my voice destroyed from crying. "My beautiful baby boy wants me dead." The words broke something fundamental inside me. A mother's love is supposed to be unconditional, unbreakable. But how do you love someone who sees your death as a payday? By dawn, something had shifted inside me. The tears had dried, leaving salt trails on my cheeks like war paint. I stood at my bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, but there was something new in them. Not the soft, giving gaze of a mother who'd spent 40 years putting everyone else first. This was the look of a woman who'd survived losing her husband, raised 3 children alone, and worked double shifts until her bones ached. If I could survive all that, I could survive this betrayal. "You want to bury me, Michael?" I said to my reflection, my voice hoarse but steady. "Let's see who ends up in that coffin." The transformation felt physical, like steel replacing my spine. I straightened my shoulders. the same shoulders that had carried this family for decades. My hands, worn from years of IV insertions and endless dishwashing, clenched into fists. These hands had saved lives in the emergency room, had held dying patients while they took their last breaths. They could certainly save my own life now. I thought about the woman I'd been before marriage and motherhood. Margaret O'Brien, top of her nursing class. The girl who'd grown up in Chicago's rough South Side and fought for everything she had. That girl had been fearless, taking night shifts in the trauma unit that made older nurses quit. She'd been strategic, learning to navigate hospital politics and difficult doctors. Where had that fighter gone? She'd been buried under decades of sacrifice and servitude, but she wasn't dead. Not yet. My military-trained brother used to say, "Never let the enemy know you've discovered their position." Michael thought I was weak, confused, ready to die. That was my advantage. He'd grown comfortable in his deception, careless even, leaving that funeral card where it could fall out, discussing murder plots while I was in the house. His arrogance would be his downfall. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. At the top I wrote Operation Resurrection in bold letters. If they wanted to stage my death, I'd give them a performance they'd never forget. But this required planning as meticulous as theirs, maybe more so. I had 8 days until that funeral appointment. 8 days to gather evidence, build a case, and turn the trap around on the trappers. First, I needed allies. Not family. Sarah and David didn't need this burden, not yet. But Patricia Williams, my friend from book club, had been FBI for 30 years before retirement. She'd mentioned once that retirement was boring, that she missed the thrill of investigation. Well, I was about to make her retirement very interesting. There was also Tom Rodriguez, the prosecutor who attended our church. He'd lost his own mother to elder abuse 5 years ago and had become an advocate for seniors. He'd understand the urgency, the danger. I thought about Michael's plans, how he'd isolated me, painted me as declining. I'd use that against him, let him think his poison was working. I'd move slower when he visited, repeat myself occasionally, act confused about small things. Meanwhile, I'd be documenting everything, recording every word, building a case so airtight that no amount of his charm could talk his way out of it. The Margaret who'd baked cookies and waited patiently for love to be returned was dead. She died sometime between finding that funeral card and this moment. In her place stood a woman who'd raised 3 children alone, who'd survived on 3 hours of sleep for years, who'd faced death 1,000 times in hospital corridors. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a survivor, a fighter, and a woman with nothing left to lose. Michael had made one fatal error in his perfect plan. He'd forgotten that before I was his mother, I was Margaret O'Brien from the South Side, and South Side girls don't go down without a fight. My first call was to Patricia at 7:30 that morning. "I need your help," I said simply. "Bring your old recording equipment and meet me at the coffee shop on Madison. Don't come to my house." Patricia, trained by decades of FBI work, didn't ask questions. 20 minutes, she replied, and hung up. Over coffee, I laid out everything. Her face went from shock to furious to professionally focused. "We're going to nail this bastard," she said, pulling out a notebook. "Pardon my language, but anyone who tries to kill their mother deserves what's coming." Patricia still had connections everywhere. By noon, we had a plan that would make Michael's conspiracy look amateur. Her daughter, Rebecca, was a senior partner at Mitchell & Associates, specializing in elder law and criminal prosecution. Within hours, I was sitting in Rebecca's office, signing papers to secretly transfer all my assets to an irrevocable trust that Michael couldn't touch, even if I died. The beauty was that it was backdated 2 years, perfectly legal since I had documentation proving my intent from old emails to my original lawyer. Michael would inherit exactly $1, the minimum required to prevent him from contesting the will. We installed cameras disguised as air fresheners in my living room, kitchen, and dining room. Patricia called them nanny cams for a granny trap. The devices recorded both video and audio, uploading directly to a cloud server that Patricia controlled. We also put a recording app on my phone that would activate with a simple tap, saving everything to multiple backups. After 40 years of taking care of others, I was finally taking care of myself. Thursday morning, I made an appointment with my actual doctor, not the cousin Jennifer had arranged. Dr. Sarah Chen had been my physician for 15 years. I explained the poisoning, showed her my medication bottle. She immediately ran blood tests, confirming elevated levels of digitalis in my system. "This could have killed you within weeks," she said, documenting everything. "We're filing a police report." I convinced her to wait until after Sunday, explaining I needed more evidence. She wasn't happy but agreed, giving me a complete physical that proved I was in perfect health. No dementia, no confusion, sharp as a surgical scalpel. The next step was the funeral home. I called Thomas Morrison myself, pretending to be a grieving daughter planning ahead. "My mother is very ill," I said, disguising my voice slightly. "My brother Michael Ellis recommended you. He said you're discreet." Morrison was eager to help, especially when I mentioned paying in cash. During our meeting, I wore Patricia's wire, recording him explaining how he could expedite cremation, avoid autopsy requirements, and handle delicate situations where family members might ask uncomfortable questions. He even bragged about other families he'd helped with irregular circumstances. Patricia discovered that Dr. Kyle Morrison had lost his medical license 2 months ago for falsifying death certificates. He was practicing illegally, which made any document he signed invalid and criminal. We found 3 other families he'd defrauded, all elderly women whose children had inherited surprisingly quickly. Rebecca contacted them all, building a class action case that would destroy both Morrison cousins. I visited my bank with Rebecca, explaining the situation to the manager. We reviewed security footage showing Michael accessing my accounts, forging signatures. Ashley was horrified. "I thought he was such a devoted son," she said, immediately freezing all accounts and creating new ones only I could access. We documented every fraudulent transaction, every forged document. The bank's legal team started their own investigation, eager to avoid liability for enabling elder abuse. Saturday night, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the evidence. 7 hours of recorded conversations, medical documentation of poisoning, proof of forgery and fraud, testimonies from witnesses, and a clear money trail. Patricia had even found Jennifer's communications with developers, including one email where she'd written, "The old bat should be gone by October." Tomorrow was Sunday, Michael's last family dinner, though he didn't know it yet. Sunday arrived with an unusual electricity in the air, as if nature itself knew something momentous was about to unfold. I woke at 5, my nerves humming like power lines before a storm. Today, my son would learn that his mother, the woman he'd dismissed as weak and disposable, had been playing chess while he thought we were playing checkers. Patricia had orchestrated everything with military precision. By noon, over 40 family members had received mysterious invitations for an urgent family meeting at my house at 4 o'clock. The message, sent from Patricia's phone to avoid suspicion, said I had important news about my health and future that required everyone's presence. Michael had called me, suspicious but trying to sound caring. "Mom, did you arrange some kind of gathering? You should have told me. I could have helped." I played my role perfectly, sounding confused. "Oh dear, did I? I've been so forgetful lately. Maybe I did mention something to Cousin Martha." Michael and Jennifer arrived early at 2:30, clearly wanting to control whatever was about to happen. Jennifer was practically vibrating with anticipation, probably thinking I was about to announce I needed assisted living. "We should talk before everyone arrives," Michael said, guiding me to the couch with fake gentleness. "About this meeting, are you feeling okay? You seem different lately." "Just tired, sweetheart," I replied, letting my hand shake slightly as I poured tea. I watched him watch me, calculating, probably wondering if today was the day I'd finally collapse. He'd increased the dose in my tea, I could smell it now that I knew what to look for. I pretended to sip, then set it aside. Oh, I'm too nervous to drink anything. By 3:45, cars were filling the driveway and lining the street. Sarah arrived from Boston with her husband, looking worried. David drove in from Milwaukee, still in his hospital scrubs. My brother Tom came with his wife. Cousins, nieces, nephews, all gathering in my living room and spilling into the dining room. Michael's smile grew tighter with each arrival, Jennifer's perfectly made-up face showing cracks of concern. "What's going on?" Sarah whispered to me, but I just patted her hand. "You'll see, sweetheart. Everyone needs to hear this." Patricia arrived at 4 sharp, dressed in her old FBI blazer, looking official. With her came Rebecca in a severe black suit, carrying a briefcase. Behind them, 2 uniformed police officers waited on the porch, not yet visible from the living room. Tom Rodriguez, the prosecutor, stood by the door. But the masterstroke was who came next. Thomas Morrison, the funeral director, looking confused, having been told this was about prepayment for services. Dr. Kyle Morrison slouched behind him, reeking of alcohol and desperation. "Quite a crowd," Michael said, his voice strained. "Mom, maybe you should sit down. You look pale." The room was packed, probably 45 people now, all eyes on me. Jennifer had positioned herself by the kitchen door, probably planning escape routes. Michael stood in the center, still trying to play the concerned son, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool September air. "Since everyone's here," I began, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "I have some announcements to make about my health, my future, and especially about the funeral Michael has so thoughtfully planned for me." The room went silent. Michael's face drained of color. "Mom, what are you talking about? You're confused." "The funeral scheduled for Thursday at Eternal Rest Funeral Home?" I continued, pulling out the business card. "The one where Mr. Morrison here was going to provide a closed casket and immediate cremation?" Gasps rippled through the room. Sarah stood up, David stepped forward, and Michael looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting between the exits. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "you're not well. You're imagining things." "Am I?" I asked, pulling out my laptop. "Then let's see what everyone thinks of this." I opened my laptop and connected it to the television Sarah had given me last Christmas. The room held its collective breath as I pulled up the first recording. Michael's voice filled the room, clear and damning. "Mom's been healthy her whole life. If she suddenly drops dead, people will ask questions." Then Jennifer's response about the digitalis in my tea, their discussion of the insurance money, the plan to have someone pose as me for the property transfer. The room erupted. Sarah let out a cry of horror. David lunged toward Michael, but Tom held him back. Cousins gasped. Elderly aunts clutched their chests, and Michael's own children looked at their father with dawning horror. Emma, his 12-year-old daughter, started crying. "Dad, what is she talking about? What did you do to Grandma?" "These are fabricated," Michael shouted, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "Mom's confused. She's been having episodes." "Episodes?" I clicked to the next file, the bank's security footage of him forging my signature. "Like this episode where you forged my name on power of attorney documents." The timestamp was clear, his face unmistakable. The bank manager, Ashley, stepped forward from the crowd. I'd invited her, too. "That's definitely Mr. Ellis," she confirmed. "We have 17 instances documented." Jennifer tried to edge toward the kitchen door, but Patricia moved to block her. "Going somewhere, dear?" Patricia asked sweetly, holding up her FBI credentials. "I'm retired, but these officers aren't." Dr. Kyle Morrison, drunk and panicking, broke first. "It was all Michael's idea," he slurred. "He blackmailed me. He knew about my gambling debts, said he'd expose my suspended license if I didn't agree to sign the death certificate." "Shut up," Michael roared, but Kyle continued, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "He was going to poison her slowly, make it look natural. The funeral was all arranged, cremation to destroy evidence. Jennifer already had buyers for the house. Thomas Morrison, the funeral director, tried to run, but the officers were already moving in. "I want a lawyer," he kept repeating, but the damage was done. The entire room had heard everything. Then came the twist no one expected, least of all Michael. Patricia stepped forward. "Mr. Ellis, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder." But as the officers approached with handcuffs, she added, "Oh, and there's one more thing." She pulled out a photograph. Recognize her? It was the woman Michael had hired to pose as me after my death. "She's been working with us for 3 weeks. Every meeting you had with her was recorded. She's actually Detective Maria Santos, Undercover Elder Crimes Division." Michael's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair as the reality hit him. Every single aspect of his plan had been monitored, documented, recorded. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been shame. "Mom, Save it for the judge," I said coldly, "though I doubt he'll be as forgiving as I've been your whole life." The room watched in stunned silence as the officers cuffed Michael and Jennifer. Dr. Kyle Morrison was arrested for practicing without a license and conspiracy. Thomas Morrison was taken for fraud and conspiracy to conceal a crime. As they led Michael past me, he stopped. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you just die quietly?" "Because you forgot something important," I replied, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I'm not just your mother. I'm Margaret O'Brien from the South Side of Chicago. I survived poverty, gang wars, and raising 3 kids alone. Did you really think a little poison in my tea would take me down?" The police led them away as 45 family members stood in shocked silence, processing what they'd witnessed. Sarah and David ran to embrace me, both crying. "Mom," David said, "how long has this been going on?" "Too long," I replied, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of it all. "But it's over now." The weeks following Michael's arrest felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into sudden daylight. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. The evidence was so overwhelming that Michael's lawyer, a public defender since all his assets were frozen, advised him to take a plea deal: 25 to life for attempted murder, with additional consecutive sentences for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Jennifer got 15 to 20 as an accomplice. The Morrison cousins each received 10 years for their roles in the conspiracy. The day of Michael's sentencing, I sat in the courtroom's front row, wearing the same dress I'd worn to his college graduation. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood slowly, my voice clear and strong. "Your Honor, the man before you isn't the son I raised. That boy died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who saw his mother's death as a business opportunity. I don't ask for mercy for him. He showed me none. But I want him to know that despite everything, the mother he tried to kill will keep living, keep thriving, and keep the family together without him." Michael cried then, perhaps the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. But tears couldn't wash away attempted murder. Sarah and David rallied around me with fierce protectiveness. They took turns visiting every week, bringing their children who still called me Grandma with the same love as before. Emma and Tyler, Michael's children, were the innocent casualties of their parents' greed. My former daughter-in-law's sister took custody, and I made sure to see them regularly, determined that they wouldn't pay for their parents' sins. Emma, wise beyond her 12 years, told me one day, "Grandma, I'm glad you're okay. I'm sorry, my dad. I'm just sorry." The house that Michael and Jennifer had already mentally sold became a different kind of inheritance. I established the Margaret Ellis Foundation for Elder Protection, using part of my savings to fund legal assistance for seniors facing family exploitation. The first floor of my home was converted into offices where volunteer lawyers and social workers could meet with victims. Patricia ran the security assessments, teaching elderly people how to protect themselves from the ones who should love them most. My book club became my support group. These women who'd discussed fictional mysteries for years had watched a real-life thriller unfold. Gladys, usually so proper, summed it up best. Margaret, you gave that boy everything, and he tried to take the one thing you wouldn't give, your life. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Their fierce loyalty helped heal wounds that went deeper than any physical poisoning. The roses in my garden bloomed magnificently that fall, especially the white ones I'd planted for Michael. I considered tearing them out, but David stopped me. They're not his anymore, Mom. They're yours. You planted them. You tended them. You made them beautiful. Don't let him take that too. So I kept them, but I planted new bushes too. One for each grandchild who still loved me, for Sarah and David who stood by me, for Patricia, who helped save my life. The neighborhood, which Michael had told I was declining into dementia, welcomed me back with newfound respect. Mrs. Patterson brought casseroles with notes saying, "For the strongest woman on our street." The church, where Michael had suggested I was too confused to volunteer, gave me a standing ovation when I returned to the food pantry. Father Thomas pulled me aside and said, "Margaret, you've shown us all that turning the other cheek doesn't mean accepting abuse. Sometimes, righteousness means fighting back." 6 months after the arrest, I hosted Sunday dinner again. The table was smaller but filled with genuine love. Sarah carved the roast while David poured wine. Their children played in the living room where their father had planned my murder, filling it with laughter instead of conspiracy. The empty chairs at the table were noticeable, but not mourned. We'd lost cancer, not family. 1 year later, I stood in my rose garden at sunrise, cup of coffee warming my hands, the morning light catching the dew on the petals like tiny diamonds. The white roses I'd planted for Michael still bloomed, but now they meant something different. They weren't monuments to a lost son anymore. They were reminders that beautiful things can grow from poisoned soil if you're strong enough to keep tending them. The house that had nearly become my tomb was now full of life in ways I'd never imagined. Every Tuesday, the Foundation's support group met in my living room, 15 to 20 elderly people sharing stories of family betrayal and finding strength in each other. Last week, an 82-year-old man named Walter cried as he told us how his daughter had been draining his accounts. By the end of the meeting, Patricia had him set up with recording devices, and Rebecca was handling his case pro bono. We'd saved another one. I received letters from Michael occasionally, forwarded through his lawyer. The first few were angry, blaming me for destroying his life. Then came the desperate ones, begging for forgiveness, swearing he'd changed. The latest one sat unopened on my kitchen counter for a month before I finally read it. "Mom," he'd written, "I lie awake at night thinking about Sunday dinners, your pot roast, the way you smiled when I walked in. I threw away everything real for money that wouldn't have made me happy anyway. I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but I'm sorry." I wrote back just once. "I'll always be your mother. That's why I couldn't let you become a murderer. Your children are healthy and loved. The roses still bloom. I'm still alive. That's all you need to know." Emma visited last week, now 13 and looking more like her grandfather every day. She's been seeing a therapist to process what happened, but she's resilient. "Grandma," she said, helping me frost cookies, "my counselor says what Dad did wasn't about you. It was about something broken inside him." Such wisdom from someone so young. I hugged her tight. This child who chose to love me despite everything her parents had done. "Blood might be thicker than water," I told her, repeating words I'd learned the hard way. "But greed is thicker than blood. Never forget that, sweetheart. The people who claim to love you the most might be the ones calculating your worth in dollars and cents. Love isn't about what you can give someone or what they can inherit from you. Real love is about showing up, staying present, and valuing the person over their possessions. The truth I've learned at 70 is this. We raise our children thinking love is a guarantee, that the babies we nurture will naturally grow into adults who cherish us. But sometimes, somewhere along the way, entitlement replaces gratitude. Greed corrupts love. The child you sacrificed everything for might be the one plotting your funeral while you're still breathing. The signs are always there if we're willing to see them. The questions about money that feel too urgent, the sudden interest in your assets, the way they look at your home like it's already theirs. Trust but verify. Love but stay alert. And never, ever ignore that voice in your gut that says something's wrong, even if that voice is warning you about your own child. What would you do if you discovered your own family plotting against you? I ask you now, just as I asked myself that September day when I found that funeral card. Would you have the strength to fight back? Would you choose justice over family loyalty? Would you be able to look your own child in the eye and say, I choose my life over your greed? I know my answer now. I chose to live. I chose to fight. I chose to turn my would-be killers into prisoners and my story into a warning for others. Because sometimes the real monsters don't lurk in dark alleys or break into our homes. Sometimes they sit at our dinner tables, eat our food, accept our love, and plan our deaths between bites of homemade apple pie. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, a parent, grandparent, or elderly friend who might be too trusting, too willing to believe the best about their family, please share it with them. Subscribe for more stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary betrayals and finding the courage to survive. And remember, your life has value beyond any inheritance. Don't let anyone, not even your own children, convince you otherwise. Stay vigilant, stay strong, stay alive.